little bit about how you got those endorsements, what your relationship is with Star Trek.
I was introduced to Star Trek by my Uncle Mike, and Uncle Mike was the guy in the family who was the strange one, but he was wonderful and sweet, and he would come home though and go, "Oh, I'm into a liver flush this week," or "Did you hear that taking cherry-flavored minerals will make you live longer?" And, that's kind of how he was. So he was the one in the family who was really into Star Trek. And, I didn't know what it was. I mean, my dad showed me Star Wars, and I was like, yeah, okay, it's pretty good. I like it a lot. Okay, yeah. But, it was Uncle Mike who was always going on about Star Trek. So I would watch it with him. And, I really was introduced to it through him. He actually passed away about a year and a half ago now, and it was kind of unexpected. And I just wish that he was around to see that page of endorsements and to meet some of these actors, because they are people he just really respected and looked up to, and he loved what they did. So how I met them was it came about through the old joke, I'm a volcanologist. Oh, live long and prosper. Everyone would, do the Vulcan salute. And I'm like, no, volcanoes. But I like Vulcans too. I love to be logical. And so I got introduced to John Billingsley, who played Dr. Phlox on Enterprise. And he is a wonderful connector of people. And, he has no shame. So he went around and introduced me to people. And so I've gotten to meet, I've gotten to meet Geordi, so LeVar, and of course Data with Brent Spiner and Marina Sirtis, and so many great people. Tim Russ did a little video with me. Aaron Eisenberg, who was Nog. Ron Roddenberry has actually been a big supporter of the campaign, and it's kind of mind-boggling to me how many of them I've met. And I actually now I just finished watching Star Trek Discovery. My husband and I, it was the only show we had time to watch, because campaigning is pretty much a full-time job and then some. But we watched Discovery and we loved it. And so now the really neat thing is I've gotten to know Mary Chieffo, who plays L'Rell on Discovery. L'Rell is the really awesome, badass Klingon. And so knowing her in real life and then seeing her character on screen, it's really amazing to see how different the two people are. It couldn't be more opposite.
Now, do a lot of those actors live in the 25th District?
Aaron Eisenberg does. A lot of them just have worked up there, so they care about the community just by virtue of having shot various shows in the district. And an interesting point of note is that when Captain Kirk fought the Gorn, that was at Vasquez Rocks, which is in the 25th District, and it's 7 minutes from my house. Plus, it's one of the areas that we take geology students when they're learning about geology. Everyone goes to Vasquez Rocks. So it's a real place, too. It's not just, Gorn battle scene.
No, it makes sense because you can see all the different layers in the rock, and they're sort of at an angle.
Yes.
I've obviously seen the location many times.
So you live on planet California.
There's a lot of California
pretty much.
Well, let me ask you some Star Trek questions then. I won't be too rough on you. Speaking of volcanology in Star Trek, there's 3 different stories that spring to mind, 2 of which are Next Generation stories. One is an episode called Pen Pals, in which Data makes friends with an alien who lives down on sort of a pre-warp planet that's suffering from volcanic catastrophes. And the solution, they have a starship, so I guess the solution is to drill holes with the phasers into the crust of this planet to relieve pressure from the volcanoes. I guess I'm curious how accurate the science would be. I mean, what kinds of, and maybe you can't answer this, but what level of geoengineering would you have to do to stop a volcano from occurring?
I mean, the basic principle is not too far off. Relieving pressure from the system would actually make the eruption not happen. The pressure really builds up. Volcanoes erupt because there are kind of bubbles in the in the melt, and as they expand, they explode. So the bubbles, the air bubbles, the gas bubbles are pushing outwards, and so if you have a way to kind of release some of the pressure that's causing them to concentrate that way, then you could I mean, potentially. I don't want to say that this works because we do actually get asked questions as actual volcanologists. We do get asked questions like, how could we stop the eruption? And to date, we don't actually have a way of doing that. So we can do the suspension of disbelief and go, yes, in principle, that could work.
I figured probably it would take a starship with phasers and maybe not drills and, things that we have available to us. Speaking of science, in the public sort of imagination, what do you think? Star Trek, one of the reasons I like it so much is that it presents a very optimistic vision of the future in which humanity has solved all sorts of problems, economic, cultural, diseases, technologies, all sorts of things, ecological problems too. And so it's like, wow, I want to live there. That would be great. But unfortunately, I don't. And none of the rest of us do either. I'm wondering, this is a very sort of wide-ranging, long-term question, but what do you think we need to do I look at California and I look at their policies and I say, wow, those seem like good policies. What do we need to do as states and as a country to get there, to get to Star Trek? What's the path? How do we get there?
Well, there's the nuts and bolts of it, which are things like invest in green tech, R&D, and make sure that we fund science. But I think on a broader societal level, we really have to be aware of how polarized a lot of our culture is right now. And it's really can be a challenge to identify common ground with people who have a different political view. So I think one of the best things we can do is try to find those pieces of common ground and those goals that are bigger than political party preference or anything like that. So if we say eliminating poverty is a goal we want to achieve, and if you can get people to agree, even if they're on opposite sides of the political fence, eliminating poverty is good, then you can start to say, all right, well, how do we think we should get there? And then everybody can put their ideas out and you can go through it. But the first thing to do is establish that commonality, because from there we can have a dialogue. I think right now a lot of the opportunity for dialogue is lost because people are just hurling insults at each other on the internet. So, getting together in person and having a difficult conversation with someone who has a different point of view, that's, I think, culturally how we start to make the shift to be where we want to go. Because the other alternative is ignoring things and letting it continue to be polarized until we have some cataclysmic, terrible event, another World War type thing, where a lot of people lose their lives and things will never be quite the same. That's what it would take, I think, alternatively. So I would rather go the route of trying to find common ground now and starting to work on solutions sooner rather than later, because I do think the Star Trek future is one that, I don't see any reason people would really object to it. It's got such a good vision to it, and it's so inclusive and so inspiring. I really would love to see us go in that direction rather than come to it through a really violent means.
So the Department of Education currently has some problems, shall we say. But what do you think the state of science education is in this country? And of course, that's going to be wildly different from location to location. But do you think that we as a country are investing enough in educating our youth about science at all of the various levels of education? There's a lot of talk about STEM, but I don't know how much of that actually gets to the classroom.
I think it's really sporadic, kind of like you were suggesting. It varies so much, and I think that's largely because we have different standards throughout the country, and so in some areas they don't want to teach things like, say, science-based sex education. It's very controversial in certain parts of the country. When to me, if it's scientific, I'm not really sure how it could be controversial. It's just fact. But we also have, we had an attempt to kind of realign the way we were teaching with the Common Core standards. But there's been obviously some difficulties because it's really hard to roll out standards that are designed to fit all kids when kids are so different. You even have kids who are twice exceptional, which I find to be a really interesting educational concept, where you have someone who may be on the spectrum, of autism in some way, or may have a mental illness or, a mood disorder, but is also incredibly smart. So then they're exceptional in two different ways. And traditional classrooms may not work, but then neither may gifted programs. So I think there's a lot that we need to do about giving schools the resources they need to address things on a more individualized level for students. The cookie cutter methods just don't work, and that includes standardized testing. So, but I know we need to find a way to make sure that our students are getting the education they need. So I think education isn't going to be something that we ever fully just solve. I think it's more of an ongoing process, an iterative process, where we attempt some changes, and then we see how it goes, and we collect some data, and then we try something different if things aren't working right. But there's a lot of adjustments that will be needed, and there really isn't any other way to go about it other than keep working on getting the resources there, because our children are literally the future. It's not just a song. I mean, it's really, that's what the future productivity and success of America as a country depends on. So there really is no better investment that we can make in education. And that means education of all sorts, not just STEM, but we really need more resources so that the teachers can do the jobs that they really want to do for the kids, and the kids can succeed in the ways that we know they're capable of.
I was thinking just tonight about how differently different kids learn. So our kids who, have essentially the same upbringing, we were talking to them about volcanoes as we were preparing for this, and we were telling them about the volcanoes in Hawaii. And our older son is very intellectual, very deep thinker. He loves reading. And so he wants to learn about volcanoes. He wants to learn what all the different things are called and sort of understand things from a sort of high level conceptual idea. But our younger son, who granted is only 3, he has a very sort of engineering mindset. He just wants to know how things work. Why does this happen? Then why does this happen to this? And so even understanding something like science, the way kids learn seems to be so important in the way you approach teaching them about, even science, even facts.
Yes, it's true. And I mean, I've taught at the college level, and then my nonprofit also has a program where we bring scientists into classrooms to interact directly with students and do hands-on science activities. And I will tell you, though, that hands-on learning is probably one of the best ways of reaching almost any student, because you just remember better when you've had a chance to touch and interact with your subject matter. So obviously you're not going to do that with, hydrochloric acid, but, you can learn how to do that in a lab setting. And then with younger kids, you can bring in different leaves from trees and help them identify different leaf shapes and patterns and understand the different parts of a plant. And those are the kind of things that stick with kids, even as young as, we work down to 2nd grade. So any kinds of hands-on activity is going to be so valuable for kids. And that goes for any subject, not just science. It can do with math as well. You've got young kids, teaching them how to count or add or subtract or multiply with blocks or with objects is going to be more memorable for them than just, listing or memorizing a multiplication table. So, but that does work for some kids. So I think that we just need to try to have more smaller class sizes and teachers who are worked less to the bone so that they can actually take time to do more hands-on engagement with students.
Speaking of teaching at the college level, it seems like there's been kind of a concerted public relations effort to attack college education as an institution. And it seems to be working. I'm sure you're aware of the surveys that show that now more than 50% of Republicans see college education as a bad thing, which is a dramatic reversal from what it used to be. In fact, Republicans used to be among the strongest supporters of getting college education, probably for economic reasons. What do we do about that? I taught at the college level. Kelly taught at the college level. It's how do you undo the damage that's been done in the way people view education? People view it now as this sort of partisan, agenda-laden thing, and that sort of contaminates their view of science and the scientific method and what facts can be trusted. And I look at it and I'm very frustrated by it. And I don't know if you have an answer that can make me less frustrated, but what do you think about it? What can change about it? If I can just say it doesn't seem like the answer is to go in and kowtow to a bunch of false beliefs. But then if you sort of reject false beliefs, you're playing into the narrative that you are inherently biased against said beliefs. It's maddening. So please tell me something that can make me feel better.
Well, I would say it goes back towards starting a dialogue again. And to get through those layers of belief to actually figure out what facts are, I think it's really important to ask people questions. If